Hello and welcome to Economy 2.0, brought to you by the Silvio Gesell Foundation and the Henry George School. My name is Josh Sidman. First, a word about our next episode. On Tuesday, October 21st at 1 p.m. Eastern, we'll have a roundtable discussion about the subject of interest. Interest is a phenomenon that has drawn the attention not just of economists, but of philosophers and religions since ancient times. Yet, up to the present, there are still competing theories of why interest exists. To me, that's an amazing fact that after thousands of years, there still isn't a generally accepted explanation for one of the most basic foundational aspects of our economic lives. To explore this subject, we'll bring back two previous Economy 2.0 guests, Willem Bouter, former chief economist at Citigroup, and Felix Futers, professor of economics at the Universidad Austral de Chile, as well as a newcomer to the series, Ahmed Anwar, a lecturer in economics at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. After that episode, we'll be going on hiatus for the remainder of the year, and we'll start back up in January. If you find this series valuable and want to support it, you can make a contribution at silviogesell.com/donate. We'd also appreciate it if you'd like, share, and subscribe. As always, Economy 2.0 is meant to be a conversation, not just between our featured guest and myself, but also including anyone in the live Zoom audience who wants to participate. If you'd like to join in, just click the Raise Hand button under the React tab on your Zoom toolbar. And as a reminder, these episodes are recorded and will be posted on the YouTube channels of both the Silvio Gesell Foundation and the Henry George School. All right, let me bring in today's guest. Nicolas Franka joins us from Belgium. He's an economist and the founder of the Monetary Diversity Network, which, as the name suggests, is dedicated to making connections and fostering community among people who are thinking outside the box regarding alternative monetary systems and complementary currencies. When Nicolas and I first made contact, I recognized in him a kindred spirit in the sense that we're both focused on two things. One, the fact that our system of money is broken and needs to be fundamentally changed. And two, that there are many different ideas being promoted as alternatives to the status quo, and there's a need for dialogue between these people. It's worth noting that this second point is really what gave rise to this series, Economy 2.0, in the first place. As I talk to more and more people about my preferred ideas for reforming the monetary system, which of course are mainly based on the ideas of Silvio Gesell, I became aware that there are a lot of people thinking about this subject, but there's not a whole lot of dialogue going on between them. For example, you've got the positive money people, the Bitcoiners, fans of the gold standard, community currency advocates, and even those who seek to eliminate money entirely by finding other ways to facilitate the exchange of goods and services. And generally speaking, these groups are not talking to each other. People tend to gravitate toward one specific proposed solution and then only talk to and work with people who are pursuing the same solution. In my mind, that's a problem. Both Economy 2.0 and the Monetary Diversity Network are efforts to break down these silos and encourage dialogue between people who agree on the nature of the problem, but may have very different ideas in terms of what needs to be done about it. So Nicolas, welcome to Economy 2.0. Why don't you get us started by telling us about your background and how you came to create the Monetary Diversity Network?
Well, first, Josh, I must thank you. That's a great honor, of course, to be on this show, to be able to discuss all those important topics with you. As you just mentioned, I really want to stress that out because you're so right. It is very important at the stage of history where we are at now that we bring together all those initiatives and those alternatives to really bring about change. And that's what has driven my work, indeed. So I came as a student in economics, at first from the, let's say, the positive money movement, or at least the um, criticism of commercial bank created money at first stage. Funnily enough, I came through this realization through the libertarian school, so that was quite unintended from my end, just through my readings in economics. I fell down on that criticism, and of course, I moved along that path in better understanding the fiscal and the political nature of money. And over the course of the past 15 years, I've mainly worked for NGOs or on my own terms, I would say, as a consultant or a teacher as well, on all those various topics related to money, both on the historical side, but also on the very practical side. I also believe, and that's one of the intent of the Monetary Diversity Network, which is to bring to light all the people who are actually working in the field, both lobbying or providing content, information, trying to get the word out. More importantly than further understanding of the core issue we are facing, I believe that the ability to take action is now what we lack and where most energy are needed. And that's why the Monetary Diversity Network, which is a non-binding network, so we are not, I'm not here speaking on behalf of anybody else but me. Every one of those organizations is, of course, entitled to its own thought and ways of proceedings. But we believe that it needs to take well, quite some courage to face the current orthodox economic dogmas to bring about new ideas. So it is in this light, with the underlying idea of democratizing money, that the Monetary Diversity Network has come out based on all those, well, years of experience and I would say years in the field of dirtying the boots on the ground with practitioners and NGOs alike, especially here in Europe, but it's of course growing worldwide lately. So yeah, pretty happy to be here to discuss all those ideas. And again, I want to stress out the importance of the great work you are doing, and all those who are, well, taking some risk sometimes, maybe also for their career, in discussing those very important topics.
Excellent. So tell us a little bit more about what the Monetary Diversity Network does. What sort of functions, activities, publications, educational activities you guys are up to?
Well, it's still at its genesis, I would say, but we have mainly focused on providing spaces for all those participating members to be able to share their processes about how do they go about to reach out new publics, for instance. So how can we share the events we will have, the latest publication that we want to bring to the world? So it serves more kind of as a reasoning chamber, if you would like. It also serves to provide some guidelines about where we could go about in the future and what kind of projects we could be building together. So can be about how to accompany regions, cities, or communities to develop their own tools. So there is a question of, okay, what technological tools are you going to be using, but also what's going to be the legal framework in which you're at, or various go-to-market strategy, I would say, very with that practical side on top of having the underlying philosophy and or the components and the understanding of what a mutual credit system can do, a commitment pooling maybe tomorrow, a local currency, a voucher system, a municipal currency, a regional currency. Well, that means nothing because we can, of course, have various ways to implement that about. And that's where the expertise of the network comes into play. And I hope we'll dive into the details of those so little known systems, though they could bring about so much change and so much relief on the pressure people are currently living when it comes to cash and liquidity and the simple accessibility of a payment media.
Okay, so you mentioned that you come to this subject from a libertarian point of view. I don't know if this might be somewhat contrary to the inclusive nature of your organization, but uh, I'd like to get a little bit more of a understanding of your personal views on money. Obviously, you wouldn't be doing this if you were not convinced that it's a very important problem. However, there are a very wide range of ideas about what needs to be done about that, and some of those ideas are directly opposite one another. Um, so can you talk about your evolution to becoming aware of the problem? And I would assume that I think you mentioned that you came via the positive money route. Maybe you could tell the audience a little bit about what positive money is for those who are not familiar, and and talk about whether you have a specific vision that you prefer or whether you kind of uh, attempt more to take the position of a neutral referee whose goal is to create an inclusive dialogue.
Well, on that last point, I think that sometimes we do take up a little bit too much time and energy in like cutting each hair in half, trying to find out what's the deepest, most rooted theory, while I've chosen the path of trying to bring solutions to reality. So I guess we'll get to the various diverse new tools we can bring into the playing field. But getting to your question, which I think it's obviously very relevant. So as I found out about that, well, a new door opened to me. I kind of had taken the red pill. Once you start seeing money as well, the creation of commercial banks through the extension of loans, which, as they are being repaid, destroy money, you can only find out how it works out as a flow or over time, and how that institution has great agency on how the world around will be designed. If a bank today decides to increase the amount of lending to, let's say, small scale farmer or small scale entrepreneurs and reduce its investment in fossil fuel or whatever, it definitely has a larger societal impact than most other agents within society could have. Now, getting into the details of economics, I would say, about it, my first finding was the discovery of the myth of intermediation. So when you start putting aside the fact that no, banks do not need to gather funds in order to loan, but that loans are the act creating money, that makes quite a big difference. And then only you can start moving on to assessing the impact of the overall monetary mass. How is it tamed? How does this supposed fractional reserve system works? And well, I'm very much of the Richard Warner school, I would say, in that sense, that, or Perry Mulling in the US, I would guess, who would find central banking to be so much more accommodating than restraining bank money creation, then at some point you can really ask which way the causality works. And are we faced with an agent who supposedly tames the sector in its natural, I would guess, envy to ever grow and to keep on lending as much as it's profitable, irrelevantly of the risks it yields on society. And well, what we have seen both in the US as in Europe is how central banking has first and foremost served to, well, ensure the continuation of the business of commercial banks, even in the face of terrible financial crisis and enormous cost to society and to the public taxpayer in their bailout. And as we'll see in the next one, the forthcoming bail-ins, which will further show how the central banking nowadays is more trying to preserve financial sector as it is, rather than ensuring that we are not facing a forthcoming crisis. And that's also because the capacity to limit the creation of money, or at least try to keep it in some certain link to the actual productive capacity of the sector. You will see an MMT hint here, but we'll get to more of that. In Europe, for instance, in the last 20 years, the monetary mass of the EU has more than tripled, 3.6 times increase in 20 years' time, while we've barely had a 1 to 2% GDP growth. So, of course, there is a hidden inflation, both in assets as it is today, and in the many ways you can hold currencies today while not applying it to actual purchases, so not increasing demand just as yet for the pretty much the same quantity and amount of goods. So further inflation is very likely to be expected as well. But back on the core question, I was so first realizing the importance of the role of banking and central banking obviously led me to think, hang on, those are like human or man-made institutions. Therefore, their workings are written on sheets of paper. They are carved into law. So they are of political nature for sure. So they are the results of, well, varying interests or parties who would rather have things work this way or that way. And so pulling back on the thread further, I could not help but dive into the emergence of banking during the medieval era and find out how, well, the role of public banks, whether it was the Tolla de Cambi in the early 15th century, or the Cassa di San Giorgio, or the Banco di Rialto in Venice, as they were battling to actually have publicly serving banking institutions. And I hope we get to define banking a bit further in a moment. I realized that there had been centuries or come and go about who should be doing the business of central banking and banking. Now, maybe for the audience, I'm getting a bit ahead of myself here. So let's maybe trace back to ancient times, and then we get back to what is banking to understand the evolution that has led to today's setup. So, as I told you, and I pulled on the string of finding out the mysteries of the banking and financial systems and of money, first and foremost. Of course, I could not evade the paramount names in the field. Both the mind-blowing papers of 1913 and 14 of Mitchell Hines really hammering at the fiscal nature of money, at the importance of first the setting of units of accounts, and starting to hatch at the barter theory of money. I was, of course, very much influenced by anthropologists, Marcel Mauss, obviously, Marshall Salins, and David Graeber, unmistakably, and likewise Michael Hudson, which I believe has made tremendous also advances in the field. Also, by the way, it is phrased and courageously so. So their understanding, which I will just repeat as best as I can, and which sounds so much more grounded in actual empirical evidence than is the barter myth. So the barter myth is the story that came out of the sky that fell down on John Locke, who figured that maybe people just had found a way to trade which was based on barter. Then at some point they realized that it would be easier to use a metal token, a metallic item, in order to facilitate those trade. And based on this root metal content, then we would have a scaled fractional banking, or at least new units of account who would serve to facilitate ever more transaction. It's still amazing to me how this barter theory is still so, well, deeply embedded in the general public. I mean, I teach at Liège University as well. The topic is monetary diversity. So I don't go into all of those details per se, but at some point I have to hammer at the fiscal nature of money, because as long as people keep having this barter view of the emergence of money, they keep on thinking about it as a commodity. So this is, of course, the commodity theory of money versus the credit theory of money. And the main flaw is that they see it as being naturally limited. And that's really the first thing that we need to hammer on to the people, which is that money is first and foremost an accounting entry invented, most likely, by the Mesopotamian 5,000 years ago in Uruk and in all this nowadays Iraq region. Temples managed by people who would write down with a reed stylus on a clay tablet what amount of grain you would have brought, and by the way, which share we would be deducting, because this would need to go and feed on the army, so taxation. And in this root event, we already have so much things to understand. So, of course, the accounting nature of money. And also, by the way, the fact that writing most likely was invented first and foremost to account for what the people owed as tax rather than to write poems. Furthermore, we see the pure fiscal nature of the tool. It is because the ruling king imposed some ways by which we would be counting what you would need to bring to the temple that we start having a unit of account, the shekel. Of course, you can represent that unit of account with a metal bracelet if you want, but still, it's not a commodity money, because all those numbers, like when John owes 20 bags of grain to the temple on 20 minas, as they would have, like as their largest item, what are we counting things into is still decided by the king, who, by the way, in those times and for centuries and centuries, would apply regular debt cancellation or jubilees, again showing how money is just writing or its accounting entries. And this we must keep in our minds to follow through the future developments. And so feel free to interrupt, of course, but I just so passionate about all those topics. I will maybe go on. So those are the first learning I got from the anthropologist and from actually anybody who has been studying the question. I mean, either economists or orthodox economics textbook would not speak about that, or like just like a barely a few pages. Then they go on right away to central banking, or yeah, how it works today. And of course, you have the entire other side of the field who would at least consider those very important historical developments. The next one being the first minted coins. And there the confusion comes back again. People think, okay, minted coins, so there is a metallic content, so it must have intrinsic value. So when the state says, oh no, I've just run out of money, people believe it. But no, it's not like that. The media must be differentiated from the unit of account, or what you name the things in which you will be counting how much taxation people will have to bring in. So when in Lydia, followed right away, of course, by the Greek cities, Sicilia, Egypt, Darius in Persia, well, everyone find the technological innovation to be very useful, aka minting coins as a means to facilitate logistic aspects of military campaigns for, well, uh, military outposts to be able to buy food with this minted token from a population who would need to accept that. But now you're going to ask me, Nicholas, how would people who have never seen a coin in their life would start to say, okay, I will give out all I've hardly worked for to this military camp for some tokens which I can't eat. Yeah, they might be shiny, that helps in acceptance, but are they really worth their metallic content? The story would have that no, and in further times we have like a billion cases by which we can demonstrate that. But what's important is how it got accepted. And again, we return to the fiscal nature of money. It is because it is required to pay taxes that it creates its initial demand. And this pipe, which starts the first, let's say, core flow of money, is indeed with a relation from the public authorities and the people. But of course, certainly not the end of the story. And so maybe I'll cover some early on of the medieval banking before I'll leave you to jump on that, because I have found it to be even more something to be passionate about. So as the Roman times came in, by the way, marking down that the creditors would have their way whatever happens, and something that's definite change in the history of civilization, as for thousands of years you would have debt jubilee, or at some point you just can't repay, so you have to do some cancellation to relieve some of the debt peon or the people who would need to be working their field. But Rome and its early creditor class made sure that this would no longer be possible. Was it a cause of their downfall? I don't know. But for centuries, their systems was followed up by what some economists call the anarchy of money, which shows both a misunderstanding of the meaning of anarchy and of what monetary systems ought to be like. So up until, and I would know best, of course, for Western Europe, where I live, and there is such a rich literature in France, the Netherlands, and England, that up until in France, Philippe le Bel would try and uniformize the currency circulating in the field, there would have been plenty of various tokens which would serve their specific needs or functions. And that's where the monetary diversity comes in. Maybe it is useful to have varying tokens which perform various functions on different scales and put in circulation by various institutions that would have different goals and purposes. So we would find that church tokens could be very useful on small scale communities. Some lowly lords could, of course, well, maybe not of course, but the people listening could, of course, mint their own token. And they could try to make it like as valuable to the outside world through their metallic content as they would want. This would be like a strategic choice to have. Or would it be simply like copper or whatever, because the point is simply to have an additional payment media and an additional channel, through which you could indeed get taxation. Because when you are a duke, a count, or the king, of course, at the end of the day, what matters is how much resources you can get from your people. And the monetary token is a great way, logistically and for the people to understand, to ensure that some of their produce, some of their created value comes back to you. But then you have, of course, a hierarchy of those tokens and war in between who gets the privilege of minting those tokens. During the Crusades, for instance, there are great examples about that, where Saladin would choose not to mint the token with his own face, but of his former boss, whose name I would butcher, so I won't say it. And there are plenty of cases like that through history where you see it is a political a function to decide, okay, who is going to be minting that money and who gets, of course, the results of taxation into its own coffer. Besides that, what were the people doing? Because there is a misunderstanding, as can be induced by movies and so on, that the people will also have like their little pouch with tokens and so on. Well, most of the time they would not. They would just be living in their villages and in their communities. And there we can start and open the door about, hang on, how were the people, which we don't talk about usually through historical textbook, because we focus on the kings and queens and the emperors and the main and major development. But the common folks, how would they be dealing with one another? And that's where we have a realm of what is called today primitive monies or tokens or whatever. But behind that, there is the wealth of ways in which human communities, extending to villages, and some would have it even larger communities, to make sure that everyone feels okay with the way values is being distributed with the community. I'm phrasing it a bit in a vulgar manner here, but it's purposeful. Because at the end of the day, the point is that do we have a monetary system that is commonly accepted by everyone and indeed sustainable through times? And you can hardly say that those primitive money have not persisted through time and ensured the social functions of those communities. Whether we are talking about the Kula in Melanesia, the Korai shell systems, or the plenty of metal-based tools used in Africa, and well, the many others we can get to, which have shown their functionalities. And we won't be mixing those with the ones who came from state, or from authorities for sure, because I'm thinking of the quipu, for instance, the bracelets with strings that they would be using in the Andes, also, of course, to count up if each and every village had well and duly paid its taxes. Again, reverting to the root of who can enforce what are we going to be counting into. Some of the success of medieval time, maybe, was due also to the accounting system of Carolus Magnus, who would have, sorry, I have to translate as I go along. I'm not sure actually I can do it, but 3 ways to count like pound, penny at the end of the day, and you would have shilling in between, I'm guessing. There we go. That's the trick of having to do one's first interview in English. So, as I was saying, indeed, very important aspect, because again, we could see the difference that there was in what token from what duchy, count, tiny kingdom was being minted compared to what are we counting things into. So if you were counting in pounds, you would be judging indeed the token based on its purchasing power it would have in this and that region. And the best proof comes from the fairs of Champagne and Savoie and all those southeastern region of France, where some market interested participants would converge to have several days of trading from Bruges to Siena to Florence to Barcelona and so on. And they would be using an additional unit of account in order to, keep tabs of who had bought what from whom. And at the end of those several days, they would just come along and they would say, okay, so if you owe 20 to that guy, but he owes 20 to him, and that John also owes you 20, let's just clear all of you 3 guys' tabs. And so clearing started to come into the picture.
And this is a big change in monetary function. Most likely it was used before, but not at the scale that was about to happen. So it's important now for our viewers to understand what is banking. But we do have now all the ingredients. We know that we can count things into a unit of account, which usually would come out from the king. So let's say we're counting things in pounds. Okay, all right. Then we have payment medias, which serve to materialize the transfer in between people. So this can be a token minted by that count or that dude or that lord or whoever, that kingdom. But then a new way came about. And this one, God knows who it was, most likely 10th, 11th century. As soon as there was a merchant, most likely working in maritime trade, we'll get back to that, who would on his little notebook write down that there was Julie who owed $2,000, no, to whom he owed 2,000 pounds. And then there was John who came in and, damn, I also owe him 1,000 pounds. And so what banking is when Julie comes to me and she says, by the way, I owe money to John. I said, okay, what's that to do with me? Well, you owe me money. Yes, indeed, I do. Well, can you just simply transfer my credit to his account? And now you will owe him the 3,000 pounds and you don't owe me nothing anymore. Okay, all right. Since I'm well trusted amongst a certain network of likewise trader, I am starting to use private accounting entries to move in between deposit accounts of different people. This is banking. As Usher Abbott, mid-19th century Harvard professor, would clearly define. I just can't find any better definition than that. Maybe we'll provide the exact wording in the comment section or something like that. So very important. We're starting to use privately produced accounting entries, which serves as means of payments. And so the idea was that it was not just like a few bankers who did that on their own side, and then we wake up with the Bank of England, and then there is the free banking era, and then there is the banking model as we have today. Because that's what I've read in most textbooks, and actually even in some heterodox textbook. And it's just by chance that I've stumbled upon some like late 19th century and mid 20th century researchers, long lost and forgotten, at least I don't see them very well cited. We'll put them again in the description, who had quite a deeper story about what happened in between the 12th century and the 16th, 17th century, up until, let's say, the Wisselbank. So the National Bank, well, no, sorry, the Bank of Amsterdam. Because what were those banks doing? So first you have, as I mentioned, private banking. In 1335, maybe the first big financial banking crash, which occurred here in Bruges in Belgium, and the city had to do kind of like the first bailout. Or they had like to put themselves to the people because trade was being threatened to say, no, 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 we'll cover up if some of our banks can't indeed clear their debt. And it was the same in Spain, Barcelona, up until, well, in the 14th century, up until that point where it became so apparent that there was a need, a commercial need, and that's why I'm telling you it was very closely linked to maritime trade, because a lot of the newly created banking activities could make money because, you know, usury at the time was banned. So they had to find ways around this ban. And one way was to expect people to pay back late, so they would have a fee, which is kind of, yeah, like your interest. But the other way was to make a loan, which was actually a participation into the potential profits of of a trade abroad. So like you would need to have like quite a lot of resources to put together a team of sailors and all that was required to go far off and to make a good deal and trade. So as part of this early financing of joint ventures, some of the early banking activities emerged. And the city of Barcelona, the Generalidad, found that it was so important for the activities of the city, and two, B, that so many times had those early bankers failed on their promises, that this needed to be a public endeavor. And so in 1401, the Taula de Canby was created as one of the very first, I would stamp my feet on the ground and say the actual very first central bank, because it was operating clearing activities, transferring between the accounts of those merchant bankers, I'd rather call them that way. But it was deemed so important and so strategic that it was a public entity. So this was not a privately held, but it was a chartered institution. The same would later occur in Napoli, for instance, and, well, in various other cities as the centuries went along. But there was the competing model from Genoa, where the Casa di San Giorgio was set in place to perform mainly the same functions. So clearing in between merchant bankers, I'll call them that way, and also capitalizing on the newly invented way to finance the state, but sorry, I must take that back, of producing a bond that would yield value to the holder of the bonds against the payment of taxes from the common people. That's how we should be calling those financial tools. From Venice, well, it was taken back again also at the Casa di San Giorgio as one of the new central banking job, aka packaging and selling government bonds, in that case, a city-state, as you would easily understand. But it was not the last functions they carried out, because they also bought from the city of Genoa. So I'm still talking about the Casa di San Giorgio, this newly formed very early central banking, whose story I want to get out because it shows how for centuries this has been a debate, a burning debate. And so the Casa di San Giorgio was operating another function, which I found absolutely fascinating. They bought future fiscal revenues from the cities, both as the gabelle, so like the tax gabella, I'm guessing, the tax on like salt, but also future revenue from taxations of some long lost islands which had been conquered by the cities. And they were also managing the police over there. Yeah, you see what I mean. So mind-blowing. We could go down further that rabbit hole, but I will conclude on that medieval aspect because this lasted for centuries. And in the 17th century emerged, as I mentioned, the Amsterdam Wisselbank to perform kind of the same function, but also facilitating the trade in shares. So we can see how, based on being the ones that manage accounting entries and having the ability to make transferring between accounts which are opposable to the public, because it's a very important function as well, I should stress out to our audience, which is, again, never lose the sight of the fiscal and political nature of money. And so we come to develop a politically supported private means of payment, which is put in circulation into the society. And the discovery that I'm glad to have stumbled upon was some some public speech by a counselor of the Council of.
So Nicholas, can you hear me?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay. Glad you made it back. Um, yeah, while you were off, we were sort of talking about um, the different narratives of money, and you're very much focused on the fiscal narrative, um, which is interesting. You haven't, for example, talked about what most people who start with the subject of money talk about, which is division of labor, medium of exchange. Um, and I would imagine that the approach that you're taking would be objectionable to the very people who you said you sort of initially were a part of, the libertarians. You know, you're making the state role in this process paramount, and there are, as you know, people who think that the state shouldn't have anything to do with money. Um, that's quite a U-turn, a turn away from what you were talking about. So I don't know how we want to resume this conversation. If you want to continue with what you were talking about, or address
Yeah.
that, whatever you'd like.
I will land on my brief history. I said mine in the sense that, of course, everyone understands it with its own eyesight, I guess. So I might have misled you early in the talk, because it just so happens that it is through the libertarian school that I stumbled upon the banking issue, let's say. Because where we would agree is that neither of us want a nanny state, so allowing private gains but socialized losses as it is now, and that's where maybe we met. And those approach I could really feel to, and I've got nothing, of course, against optimizing individual liberty and agency within society. Just nowadays, I believe that it's foolish to think that it's each and everyone else, each and everyone against anybody else, but that we only run through societal constructs. And so we have to deal with, okay, how are you fairly contributing to society? Because you are benefiting from it just right now as we speak. So I certainly moved away from the harsher strands of libertarianism when it leans on individualism. But funnily enough, I would have like plenty of the same. I would agree on a lot of things still that they would say regarding the way governments are working nowadays, because I would simply take the stand that we are nowhere close to having proper democracies where things are actually worked out for the greater good of everyone. So turning back to my history, since I've dived so deep into it, I will close on that aspect, and we'll plug them back together. So I believe I was at a stage where Tommaso Contarini in Venice was discussing that topic. And it's important to point out to people that what I'm discussing here is, if I recall well, early 17th century. So there has been banks for centuries, not like 10 years, 20 years, not like a few generations, but for centuries, there has been banking in the city. People know what it is, people know how it works, and so on. And still, he makes a huge statement in the Venice Council, pointing out to all the issues that have come out of leaving that peculiar job to private entities. Failures, of course, lack of transparency as well, and because they had been dealing in in city bonds for centuries as well, because we are introducing city bonds in Venice in like 13th, 14th century. So we're like 200-300 years later. So again, it's a tool that's by now very well known and commonly used about the cost it induces to society. well, to the community, to the city at that stage. And indeed, he will have his way, because there will be the Banco di Rialto, who will be created as a public entity performing very specific public functions, just holding accounts and clearing debts in between merchants. So no loans at that stage. But again, it's important to understand that job, that banking job. And if some people want to have, we'll put Ulrich Beinsail, I'm butchering his name most likely, in the reading notes, because he's a Bank of International Settlement, high profile, a very senior central banker. And he's made the latest research on the early days of public and the central banking function as well. I think he misses on certain points, the ones I've actually mentioned in this talk, but he gives the kind of like the same oversight and also these very precise details about what are all the functions that can be performed. And so you're going to be, Nicolas, why are you focusing so much on the functions of money? Well, because you mentioned indeed that we usually stick to the traditional three, or sometimes we add a fourth. I would believe that there are many more. As soon as you actually like serve a need, this is again a function. And so the simple fact of clearing debts in between merchants, that's a monetary function. I'm sorry. When you want to induce or facilitate the investment into some certain specific aspect of society, aka it can be a city or a kingdom, it's a function of money. And I would have us prove that we can use a different media, a different payment media to represent that. And even without it, we could still consider that those are various and ever more functions being carried out by money. And today's complementary and alternative currency have the ability to facilitate the implementation of new tools which performs many monetary functions without having to leave it to just a tiny bunch of actors who have proven time and again that they were pursuing their own private profit-making interests. And so closing on that story, as you know, public banking then was kicked out. Dutch finance emerged, fully private, or at least definitely with the intention of serving the merchant class. Then it moved on to England, where the Bank of England starting to put in place what would be called the bond circuit, a way indeed to create new transferable and liquid assets at the benefit of those who would be owning them against, in that case, the king, today the population as a whole. And it worked up until the mid-19th century and the Great Bank Charter Act, the Peel Act, 1844, where it was discussed how should we let private banking increase or not. Bank runs, failures, time and again. And there the currency school supposedly won, saying, okay, we will put a cap on how much notes you can leave to circulate against the amount of reserve that you would have later to be held at the central bank. And then creating this sort of like kind of reserve fractional banking does work. But of course, you can't just like put things into against one another and say that it works. It's got to work when it's needed. And further crashes that there would be down the road, and the actual incapacity of the banking sectors to being limited in its money creation derived from the fact that the banking school, who was said to have lost at the time, well, they still had the ability to create bank deposit through book entries. And nobody was a fool at the time, by the way. There are like lots of papers explaining that, yeah, we've been fooled. Lots, maybe not, but there are some. And what that means is that, yes, okay, maybe the bank, the same as you would go to an ATM nowadays and you get some notes, and this would be saying like, okay, the bank has a limitation on the amount of notes it can produce. Of course, at the time, there were notes with their own name on it. That's very important. So their own liability against the people who would be holding these assets against the bank, and there was a limitation to that. But there was no limitation to the amount of book entries that could be done. So you come to me, I'm an 1850 London banker. Josh, you need 10,000 pounds, no problem, but I won't give you the notes. I'm limited in the amount of notes I can circulate based on the supposed treasure I'm holding here at back, which I'm not, but whatever. And then I will write that down on paper. When you need to make a transfer to one of the merchants I very well know in order to build up your fleet to support your job at the East Indian Company, well, don't worry, I will be there to make the transfer. And of those kind of money, so book entries, there was no limit. And it kept on going like that. And today I would walk into the steps of Keynes, who follows directly from my reading, at least, which of course it's a number one by definition, which explain that yes, indeed, there is a short-term, or maybe Irving Fisher paper on 100% reserve and so on, were even more clear about how, yes, there is some limitation to how much money commercial banks can create. But the truth is that they walk in steps. So they can keep on growing as long as the neighbor bank is not growing too fast rather than the other ones. So when you phrase things that way, you start seeing a central banking as like the keeper of the playground. Like, okay, you guys can play, but we will make sure that it's fair and that each and every one can make some profit, but not too much at the expense of the others. And when you start seeing things that way, so as I was saying, yeah, you understand why after the 1929 crisis, that there was a big call to have actual limitation to bank money creation. That's where 100% reserves come into place. All right, so now let me wrap things up before we can get into maybe some more question. Why all that story? It's because even before we start talking about stem script, because we are in that historical period post World War I, there is that big 1929 financial crisis. And what happens is that some people are producing, or some local entities, their own payment medias to serve some circulating function within society. Of course, this is Gesell time, so it does inspire Irving Fisher to setting up StemScript. We have the legendary Wargle. What most people don't know is that there actually was tens of thousands of municipal currencies following World War I. So it's very important because sometimes it sounds as like this ludicrous idea. Yeah, a couple of cities tried something a bit special in that weird Austrian village. Well, that's not the truth at all. There were actually many ways in which public entities, but if you think of the hierarchies I told you in medieval times, well, those were the states, sometimes the region. In France, sometimes associations of departments, which, so like in between the region and the lowest municipal level, who would bundle together and put into circulation their own notes. Why would it work? Same as Wurgel. Why would it work? I'm sorry, but because there is the promise that it could be redeemable and it could be used to pay taxes. Most of the time, it's written black on white on it, by the way. This is exactly the purpose. So one way of getting your currency in circulation is to have the fiscal power to back it out. It's not the only one. I agree with the person that talked a little earlier on, but it's a baseline one. And this would be my first criteria to subdivide the realm of currency that we can see in the world, which is first their institutional nature, very much in line with the French school of monetary analysis, from Terret to Servet, and even the complementary currency circle. They take a great interest in looking at who and under what law some people can put money into circulation. First and foremost, can it be private entities who do it at their own expense with their own risk in peer-to-peer privately held functions like free banking, I would actually have nothing against that. This is part of the diversity and maybe the first and most important one, since nowadays money is mainly book entries done through banks. A variety of banking institution would certainly induce more varied ways of doing that business, which is now monopolized through like a banking, private banking monopoly, which could be shared in between anybody who wants to do it. Doing banking is actually pretty easy if you get to the root of it. But some public banking, some regional banking, some cooperative banking, of course, and has been very useful in Europe, at least in the past, and it would certainly be more than useful today. Some environmental banking, which back in the day would just have been called like agricultural banks, like in order to support the development or the redevelopment of farmers and build to one of the most pressing issue in Europe, at least, which is food resilience, which is plainly ridiculous. And given the states of geopolitics, it's certainly a reason to worry about. So you see institutions, various ways of doing banking, various institutional and political layer at this at what level it can be done, including the municipal level. So yeah, if I wrap it up, we could go on into all the complementary tokens and notes that were deployed during World War II, showing the military or at least strategic aspect that it covers as well. And now that we've come into ever more currency wars, well, we will be considering the new tools, the new medias which are available, thus including blockchain, or a topic I've worked quite a lot on as well, the new possibilities that could be offered by central bank digital currencies, which have been, at least in Europe, totally tamed down. So nothing is to be expected from that front. But again, it serves our public discourse to explain to the people that, look, again, this is an accounting entry done by the central bank, not a private institution. So when you are holding or would be holding a central bank digital currency, same as you are when you are holding a note, you are not, you or somebody else, because any units of account which is held on the books of a commercial bank has inevitably at some point been put into circulation through a loan that pays interests. And so when you look at it that way, of course, the monetary mass is therefore interest bearing by definition. So when we look at the 18,000, maybe now it's a bit more, trillion which are in circulation in Europe, it's pretty much the same monetary mass, by the way, as in the US. It kind of makes sense too. We are all renting out this entire monetary mass through the banking sector. If those were cooperative banks, well, if I have a share in that cooperative, then I'm earning also from doing that job. If it's a public bank, it's the public who gets the benefits from doing the job of banking or clearing, of holding accounts, as was the case centuries and centuries before already. So nothing new down the road here, simply the realization that, of course, it's a very profitable business, and those who would be holding it have all the interest in the world of ensuring that it keeps being their sole monopolized businesses. So democratizing money is trying to have as many ways of doing banking as possible, or and as many democratically led and managed ways. I would prefer, but it's not for me to decide what is best on my value. But if at least we would have a true and really fair competition of the various ways of doing banking, I'm betting that over the long course, people would prefer public or well-distributed banking, as it was back in the days before universal banking was back through the breaking of the Glass-Steagall Act. I think it's Bill Clinton at your place that has done that. breaking the work that did occur during the interwar period, where at least those taking the bigger risk could be set aside from the job of holding book entry accounts. So yeah, one of the conclusion I take from that in terms of, okay, but where does monetary diversity goes? Well, when you look at the various functions, well, you can have one tool for each, one for all the various layers, and that would include, for instance, fiscal currencies, which is something that the various regions, especially in Europe and or state, could put into place. You have the mutual credit system. So a big bunch of companies who come together, everyone is starting with an account at zero, but when I buy from you, Josh, your account is credited and mine is debited. And as we trade to other people, the same occurs. But at the end of the day, if you've bought as much as you've sold on this internal market in between companies, well, then you're good to go. But in the meantime, we've used this complementary liquidity facility, another function that can be performed by money, aka accounting entries. You've got actually, I think, some like 200 barter clubs in the US. So it's a very well developed. In Europe, we've got just a few, but they have like specific, if I'm thinking of the Sardex in Sardinia, for instance, local development, maybe not functions. I'm not in the head of the CEO over there, but it does perform at least some resilience-inducing function because it promotes the local consumption. So it would definitely have some environmental impact through what we could call the propensity to consume locally. How much extra are you ready to pay to get your produce, your supplies from a neighbor rather than from far away in the world, which is especially important for us in Europe because, as you know, we barely have any tariffs or they are uniform. So they are not being used as like a political tool up until very recently, even though we can argue on that anyway, nothing went the way of inducing European reindustrialization and redevelopment. Again, a function you can carry out through investment banks who could be using their own tokens as well. But I'm getting somewhat carried away in showing off all the various complementary currency that there can be. I will end with this one, of course, local voucher systems. By the way, the most used one, citizen or community-led. Well, actually, the most used one would be Let's Group, but I'm guessing that your viewer audience would know about that. It's being discussed already several times on your channel, I believe. Also, commitment pooling with Will Reddick. So I'll leave that one aside. And you've recently hosted my good friend also Christian Gallery talking about the Kim Gower. So definitely the lighthouse in the storm of the complementary currency field because it's been pretty hard. It boomed after the great financial crisis. Then again, during COVID, it was used, for instance, to carry out, which was my job at the time, by the way, some like small scale helicopter money. You know, of course, Milton Friedman's helicopter money principle. Well, a city can do it based on its own book entries. Again, the fiscal nature of money. So yeah, a city here in Belgium, for instance, like shared 4 millions of the local currency voucher to induce consumption into the small businesses that were suffering due to the closure of small businesses during COVID. Again, just using the tool as it's relevant. Same would have for demurrage. I'm not like neither for or against demurrage. I think it's an additional property of a monetary system, can be a complementary alternative system, which can be strategically used when needed or when required, which is what the l'abeille, the bee currency in France is doing. So they also have like a digital demurrage on a local currency voucher, which was actually one of the only in Europe. And so those tools have spread out quite wide. And they certainly offer some educational purposes, because as you know more than anybody else, most likely, it's so hard to explain money to people. Well, look, in between us who are interested on that topic, we already have different interpretations, views, underlying theories, and so on. So getting a clear message to the people is so hard. And my take is to, well, do my humble part, of course, but to break the myth. So the myth of barter, the myth of intermediation, the myth that central banking is actually controlling commercial banks, because and also, of course, the fiscal nature of money, linking back to MMT, so shouting out loud that when you hear on the television that there is a need to pay back the debt, well, this is just grounded in orthodox dogmas. And this is really a big issue because most people buy it nowadays. So the educational need is paramount, I would believe, and the on-field experiment, which people then can find out and discover more about money by doing it, because it's so abstract. I mean, some of us have had the chance or the woes of having studied economics and the monetary system, and sometimes we are too deep, and I'm definitely guilty of that, into these abstract things, and it gets it harder to understand, to make transparent the importance. I mean, the soul, how it is at the very center of, well, the mechanisms which any climate activist, any social activist, anybody who would actually want a proper economic development, prosperous for all, cannot avoid that topic. So we do need to get it out there. And that's definitely one of the main purpose of the Monetary Diversity Network, which is to show, look, the money issue, it's not just like one NGO's out there, another one up here. It's actually dozens of organizations, hundreds, if not thousands of people, even more monetary systems, alternative monetary system, being used and servicing communities as we speak right now. So this is not ludicrous. This is at the heart of where, well, I would say political struggles gotta be.
Okay. Uh, that's a lot. That's kind of perhaps overwhelming, and that brings me back to what is for me perhaps the most important question, which is, how do you make this subject matter accessible to ordinary people? Or is that a desirable objective in the first place? Is money a topic which should be and can be understood by ordinary people, or is it simply too complicated and needs to be the domain of experts? I have my own, pretty strong views on that subject, but I guess that would be my first question to you: is money a subject that should be and can be the domain of everyone, or is it a complex subject which is beyond ordinary people, and the expectation that it can be made accessible to them is an unrealistic expectation in the first place?
Well, first, I can't wait to hear your view on that as well. It's a very interesting question. If you keep it at like ISLM model, Taylor rules, how will the bond market evolve based on whether or not this quantitative easing is more based on tier one assets held at the central bank because we've selected some countries and not the other ones? Of course, everyone's going to get lost, and this leads nowhere, in fact. So I believe that we need to take money at the root.
And that's why I've also started, even though a bit too late, but by Mesopotamia, by the basic rules, because if you play games with people showing how, and I will mention two, how money can work and serve its function, but by not considering the fact that it is gold. In most games, money is limited. Money is gold. I'm thinking like video games, board games, whatever, which is again a wrongly induced ID. So if people were starting to, for instance, play Monopoly, but there is someone who just like writes down the amount and people agree that they can just like hold account at each other's place, they would already start with a new vision of money. So what I do is that for years, and I will shout out to Paul Brinkemper, I've used in my class the game Moneymaker, and hopefully that will help him like sell a lot of copies, which shows really how fractional reserve banking is a thing, but not really a thing. So you do hold some reserve, but by being able to play around with your credit holdings and so on and evading bank runs, the same way, by the way, banks in the EU are working right now. They're just cleaning their books before they get like the stress test, and then they can just start doing a business as they were doing just before with more risks being taken. So that's one thing, but I assure our viewers that this was not planned. They can check out my newsletter, which I will link, because I'm soon to release a game which shows how even the antiquity coins, the coins from the 6th and 7th century BC, did not drive their value from their metallic content, but from the relation there was in between how many units, well, coins are in circulation versus how many things are being produced on the land where the workers are being forced to pay taxes in that coin. Quantity of coins, which is based, of course, on the amount a king would spend versus the amount he would destroy from taxation. So that's falling right into MMT, but chartalist theory for me is not even something to be discussed. It's empirically proven. The need to prove it other way should be in those who are claiming the natural emergence of money because they have nothing to back that down.
Okay. How do you respond? I would imagine you must hear frequently, given the nature of your um, overall narrative, that the whole linchpin of what you're talking about uh, is is an abomination. The coercive power of government is for you, it seems, the defining characteristic of money, and that, at least as far as I understand, thus far your perspective leaves, for example, Bitcoin, which anyone who watches this series knows I'm no fan of. Out in the, outside of the entire picture. And also, as far as I can tell, projects like the Chiemgauer, the Chiemgauer has no public finance function. So I'm struggling to, I agree that the historical narrative that you're describing is correct, that the barter theory is not supported by historical evidence, and is a convenient fiction that it's a good thing that people like David Graeber and others have dismantled. But we need, if the goal is to make money an accessible subject to ordinary people, I think there needs to be a narrative that takes the place of the fictitious barter story. And I'm not sure that the narrative that you're describing, which is a fiscal based narrative, is one that is going to draw people in. What is your experience with that?
Well, I'm not great at marketing, if that's what you're meaning. No, indeed. Maybe it's not the right approach in order to gather up a lot of people around. But I'm guessing that's what the Monetary Diversity Network can do. Because I've seen also in the activist movement like an evolution on what is the hot topic of the day. You know, there was like, 100% reserves, super popular right after the great financial crisis, at least here in Europe. So limiting bank money creation, definitely. Then we've had, what are the follow-ups tendency that we've had? Of course, there has been the complementary currency. There has been solidarity finance, like reorienting the flows of money. Now there is like green financing. And so time and again, you see that there are like new, trendy, I haven't made the greatest case, but help me out if you can, the latest trendy topics. And so I would say that if we can get people to understand that it's not this one that is the best or that one that is the best, but actually at the stage we're at now, any would help. Definitely any would help. But I also believe that the right radicality as an activist is just as much as is required to actually have the chance to foresee a prosperous future for all. So we can't also stick to tiny, miny measures. If we get like the commercial private bank to just reduce a little bit every year the investment into fossil fuel, how is that going to change the face of the earth? So we do need to have like the right amount. And because money is politics, it's political institution carved in the laws first and foremost. By the way, linking to what you mentioned about my fiscal approach, I still note how banks is privately held nowadays. So it's Max Weber would call that the memorable alliance, because you have like a political class which finds its own benefits in leaving the business of producing money to private entities. And it would seem that at the end of the day, everyone has found its something in it for himself, and that's what neoliberalism is all about, I believe. But that's anyway how I would understand that. So yeah, about how to make a dent on the existing situation, my take at the time indeed is to point out that money is not the problem, it's the solution. And that goes through the fiscal policy because it states that we do whatever we want as a sovereign nation because money is first and foremost accounting entries. There is no force from another planet who can stop us from taking book entries and just transforming whichever they way. An easy way to see that is that was also a popular trend in 2012-15 when we started to see quantitative easing in Europe. And so there was a big trend at the time, which was quantitative easing for the people. As long as we might be creating new money, which was only central bank reserve money, but that's also something that was pretty hard to explain at the time, we could just give it out to people. Something that seemed ludicrous, which is not at all happened plenty of time through history. And it would have like some good basis because at the time, let's remember, in Europe, we had an inflation issue. There was not enough inflation. We were fearing stagflation, the terrible woe, isn't it? I'm kidding, of course. It just depends on what's your development policy, whether or not more or less inflation is better. So I'm agnostic on that front. And yeah, at the time, using central bank created money to do something, in that case, helicopter money, but it could be to have like some new financing capacities or to take back some state debt
as is being done now. So today, you know, in Europe, like my country, Belgium, would sell its bond on the private market, who the private market and banking sector who can sell it back to the ECB. And just so we have like state financing, but through a private party who makes profit out of that. Those are, again, just accounting entries. So getting that to the people is the purpose here is to tell them, yes, we can do stuff. We are not like physically limited in the sense like the material elements. And that's, I think, is because of the barter idea of money, of the commodity theory of money, that people have that in mind. If you show them, you explain them the credit theory of money in whichever way we can, and therefore that's linked, of course, to its fiscal capacity, then we open the world of agency. We say, okay, now we can do whatever we want. But is whatever we want a good idea? Of course not. So then you need to have like the proper strategy in how you're going to go about. But if at least there was some democratization of the money system as a whole, and honestly, at that stage, I would take it either at the local level, at the national level, and of course, through the banking sector, because it's also a topic that's very interesting to discuss. Who can do banking? I don't know how easy it is in the US to get a banking license, but in Europe, it's pretty hard. So there is also like a threshold avoiding some sort of freer banking capacities on the continent. And given the liquidity shortage that we've had, this, especially during COVID, this is plainly ridiculous because it's so easy to put in place, as the various barter models have shown, that we could have served, well, the thousands, if not hundreds of thousands or millions of small business in Europe during the COVID crisis by simply having liquidity facilities. Just again, one way to show, and that's, by the way, one way to reach out to the business class as well, because sometimes democratizing money sounds like a hippie leftist endeavor. And to show absolutely not. So anybody who has a dent of sense, who actually wants to have a monetary system that serves some function which we can discuss, and can be business development, reindustrialization, daily needed in Europe, or like green investments, all of those goes through an understanding of the monetary system.
I'm wanting to take 5 steps backwards and focus on the most basic of questions, because I think so many conversations are based on concepts which have never been properly defined. And as a result, a lot of what appears to be substantive disagreement really just boils down to semantics, that people are using different definitions and they don't even realize it. So, so I'd like to invite you to join me back at the beginning. What is money? Because I'm still struggling to see how the definition that you've laid out can be applied to such things as cryptocurrencies, regional complementary currencies, not to mention non-monetary exchange models like LETs, like commitment pooling. So do you believe that the fiscal nature of money is the most is the essence, or is that you know, a level above which there is a more general, universally applicable definition that we should discuss and define and make sure that we know that we're on the same page in terms of just having a conversation with consistent definitions?
Yeah. So I think the fiscal nature of some of the monies in circulation is the most important thing to get through. But I, uh, I like my daily job, I would say, at the time is that I work for a European project where we like support some 10 complementary currency on the continent. They have no fiscal nature, but I still believe those are monies. They serve functions. So if I were to take this immense risk of boiling it down to one definition of money where so many thousands of better thinkers have struggled, I would go for any mean that permits compensation. So as long as you have a tool, which can be, it's better if it's opposable, but sometimes it is not, and still you do use it, which allow, like, you give me a sandwich. Now, there is a relation between us. Like, I owe you something. I need to compensate. So I will give you some dollars. You accept them. We are compensated. Sorry, I'm mistranslating here. Clearing. That would clear obligation. I should write. Yeah, sorry about that. It's late here in Europe. So any media that allows clearing, that allows us to feel good about previous transaction or previous commitments we have in between one another.
All right.
So in the barter systems, we just do that. We just like clear our obligation. In a fiscal monetary system, that's just what it does. Like, you have to pay your taxes. You have an obligation to me. Now, once you've done that in the legal tender, in the acceptable means, you've cleared. So we have a mean, and it can be the digital version that is created by private bank. It can be the notes put in circulation by the central bank. Or actually, it could be like you had a credit over like your state because it owed you money because it made a mistake. And now you owe them money because you have to pay taxes. And this is being cleared. I don't know if they would do that. Most likely you would have to do two transfers. But you see my point. It serves that. And if you take that definition to primitive currencies, it works as well. I should coin it maybe. Because when you were like trading cattles, it's not that you were counting cattles per se, or chickens, or in bride wealth settings, for instance, or dowry. I never know how to pronounce that word. I'm sorry. That it's the same. At the end of the day, you're finding a sweet spot at which everybody feels fine, and we've cleared our various obligation we might have felt was due from one person to another. In local currency system, yeah, of course, it's not local tender, but as long as both parties are happy, like I just bought like some jams yesterday, I paid it with my local currency, the person accepts it, I don't owe him anything, we are both happy, we have cleared our obligation from the relationship that had emerged.
Okay, I find that I'm challenged by that definition because it would seem to mean that the definition could vary, could be as there could be as many different definitions as human beings who owe and are owed consideration, because you're defining it based on whether or not a person accepts a certain instrument as a form of payment. And I might be perfectly happy to accept a jar of strawberry jam as payment for a debt that you owe to me, but that I would say that that's not enough to designate jars of strawberry jam as fulfilling
No.
the definition of money.
So since I dropped that definition on the spot, allow me to add like something about the general aspect within your community of it.
Yes, I think
Indeed.
that's important.
Otherwise, yeah, it needs to have like some either it's because it's legal tender, so it's like forced on the people. But if you take like other means of clearing their obligation, like using cowrie shell, for instance, same applies. At the end of the day, you are like clearing because you have transferred, or even the yapstone is a clearing tool because okay, so I shared okay, you have we make that marriage, or I give now I get that hut. We clear things by the transfer of another item. But why does it work? Because of course everyone in the community accepts it and recognizes it to some extent. But it is indeed a functional and empirical function. I would be from that side, which money is what money does, indeed. But that's why I go through the functions, because it can do many things. And the question would really be, if it does only one thing, is it enough to be called money? I would say yes, except for preserving value, because otherwise, then indeed it's ever ending. But to jump back on your jam jar example, Hyman Minsky would have it that way. Say anybody can create money. The issue is getting it accepted.
Yeah, I agree that general acceptance is a part of what needs to be a proper definition of money. We've got a hand raised, so let me David, if you want to come on screen, you'll need to turn your camera on. There you go. All right.
I was thinking earlier about what you said about taxes, and I've read quite a bit about MMT, so I understand, their origin of how money was created to pay taxes, and that creates relative value for the other products in the economy. So if you work 3 hours at the plantation to get so many pounds, so that's enough to pay the tax so they don't burn your hut down, then somebody else might say, well, I spent an hour picking a bushel of apples, so I'll give you this bushel of apples if you'll give me your pounds, because I don't want to go work at the coffee plantation. But if you give me those pounds, then I can pay them so my house doesn't get burned down. So, I mean, their whole idea is that taxes end up setting the relative value of other things. So, like, an hour of a surgeon's time is that the same as an hour of a carpenter's time. And the relative value of taxes seems to eliminate that issue. Am I right or wrong on that?
I don't think they would see tax as like evening out pricing in between different activities. However, where I'm full on an MMT guy is recognizing how so what can $1 buy? Well, my take is that, well, not my take, the take I abide to is that this relative value, say, okay, of the unit of account relating to what you can buy for it and how much a worker would cost or how much you would get as wage. I agree that there is some part of course, free uh, market making elements. But why, like, how would you also increase the value of the yuan, of the euro, or reduce it? Well, it's this two-way balance between how many units of account there are in circulation, how many dollars nowadays are in the books of the private banking and financial institution, because that's where the money is on their liability side, compared to how much is being produced over that land. And therefore, well, not therefore, but and the second pipe is how much units of account are in circulation depends on how much the government would proactively put in circulation versus how much it would take back from the population through its fiscal propensity. And you can see it in pretty much all the monetary crises you've seen through history. There is a great paper from the Cato Institute on that. And again, I
look at what they provide and not their underlying ideology, even though it's good to know where they are speaking from. And it's clear that, anyway, most of the monetary crises were not due to what we often refer to as the printing press, but beforehand, because the productive capacity of the land was destroyed. Weimar Republic, the traditional Zimbabwe case, and so on. So there is always this consideration to have. It's not, as Milton Friedman would have it, like always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. Yes, that's true, but it's not the full line. The other part of the line should be related to how much goods there are on the circulating in the area. And that's exactly Keynes' quote, if I'm not mistaken, but you will know better. It's like inflation is too much money chasing too few goods. And the second bit of the sentence is very important. It's that balance about how price fixing will occur. It's balance the total amount of units of account and the total amount of produce. How much units of accounts they are, the baseline legal tender. And that's where we need to decipher the various types of money. If I'm speaking notes, legal tender and created by the states, that would be the first line. But as we can see today, in Europe at least, 3.6 times more euros in circulation since the 2000. Is this because we've printed plenty of notes? No, it's because banking sector has increased its balance sheet more than 3 times over. So that's where we'll get our inflation from. And so trying to answer a question, that's how therefore price fixing would occur based on, the total amount of units that they are, but now they're created by private entities, even though they are made legal tender by the states and by laws. And it's very simple. In the EU, we have like all which, by the way, very interesting, all the laws related to the euros are actually the banking legislation.
Okay, I understand that. And one other quick thing, where does interest play into this, or where do you see the role of interest or the maybe elimination of it?
Well, I
I
really don't
just
want
want
to
to say one
spoil
thing.
on the
I
next
tuned
talk.
into this to get a drink of water, and
Maybe
I feel like
tease a
somebody shoved
bit
a fire
for
hose down my throat. But anyway,
well,
Yeah.
I would not take interest per se. I would say, okay, there are many ways in which we can say that we have a debt which has accrued in the how much pain you have to give out in order to get it back. So interest per se, I mean, if I were to lend to one of my friends, well, I would not do it at interest, of course, but I would not be shocked if someone would do it. When in face with the traditional theory of the, oh yeah, but you are compensating for some part of the risk. Now, interest nowadays from the banking sector is not a risk compensation. The spread is huge and it's been maintained over ages. So there is no question of like the banking sector is not like barely passing by or like barely, surviving. It is making quite huge profits. So the spread is working. So interest nowadays from the banking sectors, so based on the money that they create through their own accounting entries, so I'm talking about that interest rate line, that specifically, well, this one is definitely fixed, or well, it is based on the profit maximizing properties and intent and goal of any decent commercial bank. If you are CEO of a commercial bank, your goal is to make profit, and that's kind of okay. It's the deal. It's written black on white. It's for the politician, the citizen to change the rules if they don't like them. But for the CEO of a bank, it's very simple. So they would use their monopoly power because banks in Europe as in the US is not an easy field in which you can enter. There are less and less and less of them, leading to oligopolistic systems. So maximizing even more their monopolistic position as a group in producing the tool, the social tool, which we absolutely need. We do need to have some monetary medias or some like clearing tools, clearing means, I would say, for a society to function. And they are holding hostages like deposit taking
and loan capacities, because they are the only ones who can do it. And because they hold that monopoly, then they can charge the monopolistic interest rate. So agreeing with like some more libertarian, if we had actual free banking, most likely they would struggle a little more. And so interest rate in that case would be reduced. But nowadays, interest rate to compensate inflation is just us, the people running the rat race, but for the sake of the banking sector. So we kind of have to, but it's not the people that induce themselves the fact that there are more money, that there are things produced on the ground, aka inflation, because it's mainly loans for existing assets, so housing and so on, or fields or forest. So in that case, it's purely inflationary. Well, it leads to more inflation. You got my point, I guess. So in that case, you would see interest as a compensation for the inflation. And I don't like that argument because, yeah, okay, it's kind of true, but we are still being the fools here.
I think I see what you mean. I mean, what we would be eliminating, if I understood you right, would be the excessive cost over and above the bank's actual expenses of doing what they're doing.
Exactly.
That makes sense to me. Thank you.
David, I'd just like to comment. I don't know if you were with us at the top of the episode, but if not, I mentioned that our next episode is going to be precisely about the subject of interest. My point of view is that there is no definitive answer to the question. That's why I laughed when you asked the question, not because it's a bad question. It's a great question. It's a hugely important question. It's a question which has been wrestled with by economists, by philosophers, by religious scholars for thousands of years, and somehow has not been definitively answered yet. And so my reason for laughing is because it's such a huge question that there's no conceivable way we're going to answer it in the 5 minutes we've got left here today. So I hope you'll join us next time, which is in 2 weeks' time, which will be a conversation specifically on that topic.
Thanks.
Yeah. Nicolas, do you want to clue us in on what you're doing, where we can find you, ways that people can learn more and get involved with your organization and all of your different activities?
Well, yeah, thank you for that opportunity. As everyone, of course, with who is trying to get some ideas across, I've had to make my peace with going on social media. So I am now. So people could be following me. I guess we can put them into the description. I have my own website and a YouTube channel. It's solely in French up until now, I guess, since I can provide some snippets of this excellent talk, by the way, Josh. Allow me to thank you again for that amazing opportunity to be speaking here. And yeah, the Monetary Diversity website, we have like loads of things coming up, but we're also learning as we go along because yeah, there's seen that there was a need for this network to be put in place. So it will increase its capacity and definitely serve as a reasoning chamber to tell the world about what is happening in the on the various monetary fronts, if I can put it that way. So yeah, I'll try and improve on my communication. Definitely, if you go on my website, check out the newsletter. Is the most important to keep updated with my work.
All right, excellent. Well, send me any links, any resources that you have mentioned and want to have listed in the description of the video when we post it on YouTube, and then people can reference that. So Nicolas, thank you. It's been a pleasure talking with you, and I'm excited to have connected with you. I believe that we first connected through this series, which which just reinforces the idea that what we're doing here is worthwhile. Because if it wasn't for this series, you and I would probably not know of each other's existence. So it's working, at least on a small scale. So thank you, and great talking to you, and we'll keep in touch.
Absolutely. Thanks to you. It was great. And yeah, I hope we meet again online or live.
Excellent. All right. See y'all
See
in
you.
2 weeks. Bye-bye.